enjoyed lunch. The afternoon session begins. Again, I want to welcome our live streaming community globally from spiriting communities around the world. Also, we're doing some streaming of this across campus, so we've got many people in the room and many people in hyperspace. So it's my honor to open this session by asking Dr. Lisa Levers. Professor Levers is in the School of Education, has an endowed chair at the university, and Professor Levers will introduce Professor Scheid for the presentation. Lisa?
Good afternoon. I hope everybody has enjoyed a good lunch. I hope that you're enjoying the conference so far and continue to enjoy it. And I hope that you're ready for some more stimulating conversation. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Daniel Patrick Scheid. The title of his presentation is The Moral Vision of Laudato Si, the Cosmic Common Good as a Common Ground for Interreligious Ecological Ethics. Dr. Scheid is an associate professor in the Department of Theology here at Duquesne University. He graduated from Princeton University, cum laude, with a bachelor's degree in history in 1998. He received a Master of Art degree in systematic theology from the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago in 2004. He completed his doctorate in theological ethics, receiving his PhD from Boston College in 2008, with a minor area in comparative theology. The title of Dr. Scheid's doctoral dissertation was Let All Creatures Praise the Lord, God, Creation, and Promoting the Cosmic Common Good. Dr. Scheid has been engaging the theme of cosmic common good for some time and in great depth. He has published a number of peer-reviewed articles, scholarly book chapters, and professional essays concerning the cosmic common good, as well as ecological ethics, comparative theology, and Laudato Si. He teaches graduate and undergraduate courses on such topics as ecological ethics, religion and ecology, and comparative theological ethics. He has received a number of federal and university grants and fellowships to pursue his research regarding these areas. He has offered many professional presentations and lectures internationally, nationally, and locally related to these scholarly pursuits. Most recently, Dr. Scheid has published a book with Oxford University entitled The Cosmic Common Good, Religious Grounds for Ecological Ethics. He currently is preparing a second book manuscript called Cosmic Belonging, Ecological Ethics and Theologies of Creation in Thomas Aquinas and Vedanta Desica. Dan originally hails from Chicago, so I've heard that he misses good pizza when he can't get back to Chicago. He's lived in Pittsburgh for 9 years with his wife, Dr. Anna Fierke Scheid, also an associate professor of theology here at Duquesne University. They have 3 lovely children. The family enjoys hiking in Frick Park, and Dan really likes to play soccer. So to sum up, Daniel Patrick Scheid is a family man, a scholar, a thinker, and the advocate of an ecological ethics that is more germane to our society, our planet, our very existence than ever before in time. I'll tell you, I found this book so inspiring, and there's so much that I could share with you about Dan's ideas in this book, about his promotion of ecological connectedness, his carefully crafted arguments, his resonance with Pope Francis' crucial messages in Laudato Si. All of these related to our cosmic common good. But instead of taking more time for this introduction, please just allow me to invite Dan to tell us about all of this. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Daniel Scheid.
Thank you very much. Quite an introduction, my goodness. I want to thank my colleagues here at Duquesne University for offering me this honor to present here today. Just a few weeks ago, a team of scientists from the European Southern Observatory announced a thrilling discovery. They identified an exoplanet only 4.2 light years away, surrounding a dwarf star named Proxima Centauri, the nearest star in the universe to our own. Named Proxima b, this Goldilocks planet is the right distance from its star to support liquid water. And with an estimated mass of 1.3 times the size of our own planet, it might also have a similar atmosphere, and therefore potentially harbor life. This scientific advance has already elicited curiosity and wonder. What might we encounter there? Could this be a place that humans inhabit at some point in the future? I want to use this discovery to propose a thought experiment. And this is an artist's rendition of what Proxima b might look like, to stand on Proxima b and to look out at the sun. What if, in a few years, we managed to capture crisp and detailed images of Proxima b, better than we have of Google Earth, and that it is teeming with life, thriving vegetation, creatures of all sorts and shapes, ecosystems and landscapes of wonder and color and complexity? How might humanity react? I think it would be front page news worldwide. I think humanity would erupt in celebration. Earth is not alone in the universe. The power of life exists elsewhere, and perhaps in many places yet to discover. In this thought experiment, there's no indication of a species comparable to us, to Homo sapiens. No creature with rational or self-conscious behavior. So this is an adolescent Earth, a planet before intelligent life has emerged. Also, imagine that even with our advanced space technology, no human visitation is possible to this planet. Our interaction with Proxima b is limited to observation, to wonder and appreciation. How might such a discovery alter humanity's perspective on who we are in the universe, or of our role on Earth? Do we look at the Earth or the creatures who share our common home any differently? Does Earth become less magical and wondrous, or perhaps even more so? And then imagine further that a year after this earth-shattering discovery, in the sense that it changes the way we understand Earth's uniqueness in the universe, there is another. We witness an asteroid plummeting into Proxima b more destructive than that which destroyed the dinosaurs. And it nearly guarantees the end of all life. How do we react? No human being has been lost. No self-conscious life has been lost. But might we still see this as a tragedy for us, and maybe even for the cosmos as a whole? On the other hand, we don't necessarily need to imagine this thought experiment to understand what this experience might be like. In a similar way, the scientists and engineers who became our first space travelers, our astronauts and cosmonauts from countries all over the world, report how seeing the Earth from afar led almost inevitably to cherishing it. So I have three examples of this. So the first example is Saudi Arabian astronaut Sultan bin Salman al Saud, the first Muslim to observe Islamic prayers and to read the Quran in zero gravity. And he describes how being in space led all of the astronauts to view their place on Earth differently. He says, quote, "The first day, we all pointed to our own countries. The third or fourth day, we were pointing to our own continents. By the fifth day, we are aware of only one Earth." American astronaut Edgar Mitchell describes his experience of awe in beholding the Earth. And this is the famous Earthrise photo from NASA. He says, quote, "Suddenly, from behind the rim of the moon, in long, slow-motion moments of immense majesty, there emerges a sparkling blue and white jewel, a light, delicate sky blue sphere laced with slowly swirling veils of white, rising gradually like a small pearl in a thick sea of black mystery. It takes more than a moment to fully realize this is Earth, home. My view of our planet," he said, "was a glimpse of divinity." For German astronaut Sigmund Jähn, seeing the planet from space led directly to an ethical vocation. He said, quote, "Before I flew, I was already aware of how small and vulnerable our planet is. But only when I saw it from space in all its ineffable beauty and fragility did I realize that humankind's most urgent task is to cherish and preserve it for future generations." These scientist poets suggest that a critical facet of protecting the Earth is how we see it. We need a moral vision, a sense of the Earth as our common home, as a place we belong to. A moral vision precedes the choices that we make, because how we envision the world frames what we consider possible. What we see sets the direction and the limits of what we do. It generates certain choices rather than others, and it disposes us to respond in one way rather than another. Moral vision also implies a kind of moral imagination, an ability to bring diverse experiences into a meaningful whole, and to fashion a coherent picture of the world. A new vision makes new choices possible, leading us to become new kinds of people, to become a new society. These astronauts remind us that ecology, coming from the Greek word oikos, means the study of the household, the study of the home. None of us are likely, although maybe that's not true. I was going to say none of us are likely to be gifted with such a view of space, although that's changing. But still, how might we learn to treasure the fragile and precious Earth? Where might we develop the kind of moral vision we need to see the Earth as home in order that we might protect it? I propose our Earth's religious traditions as fruitful sources for cultivating moral vision. Through stories, through ideas, through images and practices, religious traditions strive to present that coherent picture of the world, and they can animate new choices and new ways of living on Earth. In the search for such a moral vision, I would like to begin from my own Catholic tradition and from Pope Francis's landmark encyclical, Laudato Si, on care for our common home. In his description of the gospel of creation, Pope Francis offers 4 themes that together forge a coherent moral vision. So the first, in the gospel of creation, we have perceiving the Creator. Pope Francis emphasizes the importance of perceiving a Creator. From a Catholic perspective, the trust in an all-powerful and all-loving Creator re-centers our focus away from solely human interests and from the temptation to view the earth simply as something to be used. Creation has a broader meaning than nature, because the concept of creation points to God's loving plan in which each creature has its own value and significance. We usually understand nature as something, says Pope Francis, as something outside of us, as something to be studied, but then also something to be understood and therefore controlled. Creation, on the other hand, is something we are a part of. It is a gift from the outstretched hand of the Father of all. Restoring a vision of the Creator offers the proper context for our relationship to other creatures and therefore to the earth as home. Pope Francis says, the ultimate purpose of other creatures is not to be found in us. Rather, all creatures are moving forward with us and through us towards a common point of arrival, which is God. The principle of creation establishes an immediate connection to non-human beings. They, like us, are fellow creatures who belong to a loving God. The second theme is that God is present in creation. Pope Francis affirms that the Creator is fully present. We inhabit a sacramental universe. so that each creature can become a channel through which we meet the divine. The Holy Spirit, the Spirit who gives life, so important to our mission here at Duquesne University, he says dwells in every living creature and calls us to enter into relationship with him. So we encounter God not only through fellow human beings, but if we're properly attuned for thinking right, seeing right, through every creature. Most importantly, God's presence in creation can be described as a presence of love. For the Christian, God is love. And so naturally, creation is steeped in the love of the Creator. Creation, he says, is of the order of love. God's love is the fundamental moving force in all created things. Here on your left, you can see this image of Dante from the Divine Comedy, the final canto, where he observes the love that moves the sun and the stars, and on the right, an image of the Hubble. Describing creation as the order of love gives us the broadest possible view of the depth of God's love. This is a little marmoset, baby marmoset. Every creature, he says, is thus the object of the Father's tenderness, who gives it its place in the world. Even the fleeting life of the least of beings is the object of his love, and in its few seconds of existence, God enfolds it with his affection. The God who is revealed through creation is revealed to be the inexhaustible fountain of love, a creator who loves all that exists. Thirdly, Pope Francis argues for interconnectedness, for an integral ecology, a holistic view of creation. Over and over throughout this text, Pope Francis insists on a broader view of reality, to see the whole rather than just discrete parts, and to see humanity as part of this larger whole. You can imagine, maybe he was thinking of some of those images that the astronauts had. One way he expresses this is through interconnectedness. He says human beings belong fundamentally and at our core to the world around us. It cannot be emphasized enough how everything is interconnected. Just as the different aspects of the planet, physical, chemical, and biological, are interrelated, so too living species are part of a network which we will never fully explore and understand. There's always an element of mystery. We've been talking about humility here, some humility before this interconnected creation. Just as creation stretches us to new understandings of nature, so does integral ecology. This is, if you can't see, this is a close-up of a small leaf, the blood vessels of a human heart, and the river network of the Amazon. So Pope Francis would say there is no nature out there apart from human society. We are part of nature. We're included in it and thus in constant interaction with it. Not only does each creature then have its own connection to the Creator, but God intends for creatures to be connected to each other. In this way, Francis emphasizes a holism to the entirety of creation. Every creature is part of a greater whole, a web of relationships. And finally, Pope Francis's description of creation as an interconnected order of love culminates in seeing the universe as a communion of creatures. We perceive the universe as a kind of family, with fellow creatures as brothers and sisters. Creation, he says, can only be understood as a gift from the outstretched hand of the Father of all, and as a reality illuminated by the love which calls us together into universal communion. So each creature has been made for relationship, with its Creator, the Father of all, with countless other creatures, and finally to the entirety of creation itself. It is clear why Pope Francis chose to begin this encyclical with a poem by St. Francis of Assisi. Laudato si are the first words of the encyclical. Laudato si mi Signore, praise be you, my Lord, which are the first words of St. Francis's Canticle of the Creatures. In this poem, St. Francis begins with praise of the Creator, and that is what leads him to give thanks for fellow creatures whom he calls brother and sister. So you can see here, praise be you, my Lord, with all your creatures, sometimes through all your creatures, especially Sir Brother Sun, who is the day and through whom you give us light, and he is beautiful and radiant with great splendor, and he bears a likeness of you most high. For St. Francis, there's always a vertical connection to the Creator and always a horizontal connection to every creature he encounters. In the same way, St. Francis will say, "Praise be you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains us and governs us, and who produces various fruits with colored flowers and herbs," appreciating the individual gifts that these fellow brothers and sisters offer to us, but also to God. There then is a brotherhood and a sisterhood of fellow creatures. Pope Francis takes us to the heart of what it is to be human, linked to all creatures, to humans, to the cosmos, because of the one Creator who loved us into existence. So, the gospel of creation recenters us on the Creator, directs us to see the Creator's loving presence, emphasizes the interconnectedness of all beings, and envisions the universe as a universal communion. How shall we name this moral vision of the gospel of creation? I propose it resembles my own formulation of a Catholic ecological ethic, the cosmic common good, which just from the introduction you heard about 5 times, so that phrase should become familiar to you. The cosmic common good begins from the tradition of reflection on social issues known as Catholic social teaching. Catholic social teaching. From the beginning, Catholic social teaching has sought to apply core theological principles, primarily the dignity of the person, and because the person is intrinsically social, the common good, to emerging problems of modern society. I contend that these principles of Catholic social teaching, once they are reoriented in a fully ecological way, once they're passed through the prism of this gospel of creation, yield a framework of a cosmic common good. Cosmic common good is rooted in a theology of creation. It is thoroughly Catholic, and yet I think some of the principles of a cosmic common good, as I hope to show you, are flexible enough that they can find resonance, they can find similarities in other religious traditions. So in that way, the cosmic common good, I hope, can be a common ground for interreligious ecological ethics. So how does this work? So I mentioned the 2 cornerstone principles of Catholic social teaching are human dignity and the common good. You see this quote from Pope Francis. I ask everyone with political responsibility to remember 2 things, human dignity and the common good. And they function dynamically together. So human dignity affirms the essential goodness and dignity of each and every human person. And because the human person is social, it emphasizes the importance of the common good, that the human person belongs to a greater whole. The human person cannot fulfill her vocation outside of the whole, and the common good affirms the essential goodness of the whole as a whole. So you have a good part, and a part belongs to a whole, and then you have a good whole, which is composed of good parts. So they fit together naturally. So on the one hand, the common good could include all those goods that we all need, food, air, water, shelter, and these goods are common in the sense that everybody has them. Then the common good could also include a set of goods that are shared by all. So you might think of our water resources as a whole. I need water, you need water, but the water in this watershed belongs to all of us. Or perhaps you might think of air. Ohio can't say, this is our air, we can pollute however we want. No, that air comes to us. Similarly, China can't say we can burn whatever we want because it's our air. No, there's one climate. So therefore the climate is a common good. This is a basic level of material relatedness, but I want to push it even further. The common good for humanity has always meant something more than just the aggregate of all these individual goods. It also includes some goods that you can't achieve except in community. It includes the full social and intellectual development of the human person. So it's not just that human beings happen to live in groups to get the food and the air and the water and the shelter that we need. It's also that one of the primary goods we get from community is relationship itself. Just like our sharing lunch just now, it was good to be fed and sustained, but part of the sustenance, maybe even more of it, was the fact that we were eating together. So all the varied ways in which we share our lives together aren't just a means to individual fulfillment, they are aspects of our personal fulfillment itself. Now, traditionally, common good and dignity were understood in a human context, the human common good and human dignity. But I think on both scientific and theological grounds, I want to offer various reasons why these principles should be reoriented to become the cosmic common good and creaturely dignity. So first, we heard of this last night in our plenary presentation. Any reasonable theological ethic must attend to a realistic picture of the world. And the sciences increasingly are telling us of a much broader dimension of our human existence. The 13.8 billion year history of the universe's evolutionary self-development, the origin of the universe which has led to the emergence of life on Earth, shows that to be human is not merely to be a creature among others, it is to be related in our very genes to countless life forms, to chemical reactions, to physical processes. Humans are part of what some call the journey of the universe. We have shared genes and a common ancestor, Professor Goodenough taught us last night. Human beings are kin to all the creatures we encounter on Earth. And indeed, all life on Earth can trace itself back to galactic and cosmic sources. The example I like to use in class is when you cut your hand and your blood is red, it turns red in part because of the iron. That iron comes from a star billions of years ago. Literally, the presence of stars are running through your blood. Only an ethical framework that draws on the full scope of the evolutionary development of this kinship can be an adequate response. The cosmic common good, then, tries to give an understanding of who humans are in the cosmos, which, frankly, is incomprehensibly massive in time and space. Second, common good limited strictly to humans makes no sense in light of ecological interdependence. Humans are related to earthly creatures in the cosmos, not simply by evolutionary roots, but because we are radically dependent on the earth for our survival, for our food, water, air, shelter. Every day we depend on minerals in the earth's soil and the energy of the sun to feed us and to sustain us. But in a way, too, Professor Porter mentioned this, we depend on the earth for our psychological and spiritual survival as well. We have long known that contact with non-human nature refreshes us and restores us. And we're entering an age of nature deficit disorder, which has tangible psychological, I would say spiritual impact. It is therefore necessary to look at the greater common good without which our individual or our collective well-being would not be possible. And the third scientific reason, we are now aware of the vulnerability of our planet to impairment and to breakdown. We see this in climate change, we see this in the loss of coral reefs, in the extinction of species. The Earth is vulnerable to human action and inaction. More and more, the Earth is resembling a pile of filth, Pope Francis says. So a degraded Earth reconfirms we can't separate the human common good or human role on this planet from that of other creatures. So those are some scientific reasons why I think we need a broader moral vision. But I think there are theological reasons as well, and it goes back to the gospel of creation. The cosmic common good is rooted in a theology of creation because God is the center, not the human person. The doctrine of creation establishes a common bond between humans and all other creatures. The bigger distinction is between creator and creature, not human and non-human. But more than that, it gives all of creation its divine context, as you see in the gospel of creation. Creation is of the order of love. If you see rightly, you see love. A Catholic cosmic common good has as its focus the totality of what exists. And the term cosmos is meant to highlight the context that has no center other than God. And it raises up as worthy of our reflection and our care, or at least just our wonder, places like Proxima b, or those vast aspects of our cosmos that we will never see, perhaps dark energy and dark matter. How do we relate to that? In addition, a cosmic common good helps us understand not just the human role in the cosmos, but the planet Earth's role in the cosmos. A sustainable and flourishing Earth community has bearing for the flourishing, the well-being of the cosmos as a whole. And we can sense that, I think, when we think about the destruction of a planet like Proxima b, or as we witness the destruction of aspects of the Earth. Is there something in us that suffers a loss? Now, for Christians, I would say cosmos is synonymous with creation. But I use the word cosmic here, cosmos, cosmic common good, because I want to offer an opportunity for traditions that have a different God or have no God at all to offer up their own moral vision that might find resonance with this. So the basic outlines of the cosmic common good I think can be flexible, and I'll try to show that in a little bit. But first I wanted to offer 7 different features of this cosmic common good. And the first is that for Christians and others who believe in a creator, it will be theocentric. It'll be centered on the theos. It'll be centered on God, always reminding humans that we are not the center of the world. But for others, it could be a kind of cosmocentrism, geocentrism. Number 2, it leads us to see the earth and the cosmos as a commons. And I like that word commons. If you think of a village commons or a school commons, you get this idea not only of shared physical closeness to each other, or a place where people come for their mutual needs to be met, but you also get a place of shared relationship, shared contact with each other, a shared life together. And that's what allows us to call the earth, or our local slice of the cosmos, our home. Third, creaturely dignity. So each member of the universe possesses intrinsic value and dignity, even if they must be used by other creatures for their survival. Human dignity, we talk about the dignity of the human person, and indeed, the human person may be more dignified, more noble, and under the right certain circumstances is to be privileged over and above other creatures. But human dignity must be seen as a subset of a wider fabric of dignity, which is what I call creaturely dignity. Fourth, drawing both from ecosystem sciences and from theology, we see the good of a diversity of species. Diversity lends greater stability to ecosystems and to the earth as a whole, and it better represents the creativity and the goodness of the Creator. Fifth, there's a kind of holism to the cosmic common good, as you see in the gospel of creation. It's not just individual creatures, but the entirety of the cosmos. So humans inhabit an ordered universe not centered on us that has its own goodness and dignity. So here, it's trying to balance a concern from the small all the way up to the greatest reaches of the cosmos. And all along the way, each creature that you see is both a part and a whole. You see a member of a species a member of an ecosystem member of a planet, all the way building out to the cosmic common good. All of these should be brought within the circle of moral consideration. 6, threats to this order of love, this communion of creation, they're a matter of justice. They require moral action. The cosmic common good, then, is a moral vision that tries to alert us to the polluted earth as a moral problem. And 7th, humans do not fulfill their human calling unless they seek the good of all creatures with whom we share our lives. That's what human dignity consists of. We talked a little earlier about what does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God or have dominion over the earth. Maybe it means to be intelligent, rational pursuers of the cosmic common good. So, I propose that the cosmic common good has similarities to other religious traditions, and that in tracing these out, the cosmic common good, or another proposal from another tradition, could be seen as a kind of common ground for interreligious ecological ethics. And I don't mean to suggest here that this moral vision will automatically be accepted by everyone, or that it would demand conversion by the entire world to a particular set of principles or particular theology. But I do wonder if this moral vision might help bring people together. Can it cross religious and cultural divides to a shared commitment to protect our common home? So I want to look at a few religious traditions and see how this might work. So the first, in Islam, Muslims are wary of celebrating the goodness of nature to such an extent that it would blot out or it would eclipse the presence of the Creator. It would make nature an idol. For Islam, all of creation is Muslim. It submits to God's laws. And all creatures have a purpose and usefulness beyond that of service to humanity. Islam is thoroughly theocentric, and this matches the first theme from the Gospel of Creation that I mentioned. This is from the Quran. The 7 heavens and the earth and all that is therein glorify him, and there is not a thing but that it glorifies him with his praise. But you do not understand their glorification. So similar to Pope Francis, Islamic environmentalism will trace ecological harm back to humanity. Human beings are called to be stewards of the earth. That is what their role is, and to serve as a channel for God's blessings to the rest of creation. The problem for them, in their moral vision, is that some human beings, a small portion of them, frankly, have kept too much to themselves and so have failed in their role as steward. So Islamic environmentalism draws its mandate from respect for the Creator. I have 3 more traditions, so bear with me. All right, the second tradition is Hinduism. In Hinduism, one of the central concepts is dharma, and it's the Sanskrit word that means to uphold, to support, to sustain. And it means many, many different things. It means cosmic order, the way that the whole universe is structured. It means justice in society, the way in which human societies are upheld and sustained. It means religious duty, and it means personal happiness, the way that the individual person is upheld and sustained. Hindu theologians have taken this concept and expanded it into dharmic ecology. And a key principle of this is that the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Being resides in all beings. The divine is the innermost reality of any creature. And there are many passages from Hindu scriptures that affirm this and attest to it. One example is the Bhagavata Purana, which is all of a hymn to Krishna. And it says, ether, air, fire, water, earth, planets, all creatures, directions, trees and plants, rivers and seas, they are all organs of God's body. Remembering this, a devotee respects all species. In the sacred text, the Bhagavad Gita, which I'll explore in a little more depth here, there's a remarkable parallel between Francis's gospel of creation and the way that Krishna indwells all reality. The Bhagavad Gita, also known as the Song of the Lord, is certainly the most widely known of Hindu scriptures. It consists of a dialogue between the warrior Arjuna, there on the left, and his charioteer Krishna, who's there on the right. So it takes, the scene set is on the eve of a great battle between these two cousins by birth, fighting over a kingdom. Arjuna is devastated by this idea that he has to go and fight his cousins. So it's a major moral dilemma. What is the meaning of this life that is precipitated by this? And so he talks to Krishna about what do I do? And over the course of this dialogue, Krishna reveals himself as the creator, as an avatar of the supreme creator Vishnu, as an incarnation of Vishnu. Krishna explains, unborn am I, changeless is myself. Of all contingent beings, I am the Lord. So there you see, I am unborn, I am changeless, I am transcendent, I am beyond all creation. Yet by my creative energy, I consort with nature and come to be in time. So this transcendent creator is present in time through nature. Whenever the law of righteousness withers away, and that's the law of dharma, and lawlessness arises, then do I generate myself on earth. For the protection of the good, for the destruction of evildoers, and for the setting up of the law of righteousness, I come into being age after age. So you see two different ways that Krishna is present to creation. One, as the unborn source of all that is, and then also as a deity who enters into the world. Now in the Christian tradition, we only have one incarnation. We don't have multiple incarnations. But there's a similar theme of divine indwelling. And in particular, divine indwelling to do what? To uphold dharma, to uphold righteousness, to uphold cosmic order. In another passage, Krishna says, of this whole universe, the origin and the dissolution too am I. I am the beginning and the end, as Jesus says. Higher than I, there is nothing whatsoever. So again, you get that strong vertical belonging to the Creator, belonging to the Lord. On me, this universe is strung like clustered pearls upon a thread. And this image of pearls on a thread is interesting because it gets a sense of the form and structure of the universe is sometimes hidden from us. It's present, but it's hidden. But you also get this image of the entire universe as a necklace strung upon the Lord. That you get this image of goodness and value and beauty as it belongs to the Lord. And finally, Krishna says, by me, unmanifest in form, all the universe was spun. In me subsist all beings, I do not subsist in them. Again, the distinction between creator and creature is much more important than any distinction between particular creatures. But great-souled people, the wise, take up their stand in a nature that is divine. And so with mind intent on naught but me, they love and worship me, knowing me to be the beginning of all contingent beings. So you get this: creation is the order of love. God is present in and through all creatures in all creation. And the wise, who can perceive this creator, who know Krishna to be the beginning of all beings, therefore come to love and worship him. And then Krishna says, I am the way, the sustainer, the Lord and witness, true home and refuge and friend. And this is not just in reference to the great soul. This is in reference to all of creation, to all creatures that exist. True home, refuge, and friend. So again, you get that great sense that the Lord is intimately involved with all of creation. In Buddhism, there is no supreme God. There is no creator to whom all creatures belong. So there is no doctrine of creation. Yet the Buddhist understanding of interdependence is in a way so central it can be likened to the book of Genesis for Christians. This is the origin of the universe, interdependence. Now, this is complicated, so I'll just try to sketch this out very briefly, but interdependence stresses that what a thing is depends on multiple past and present factors. And two ways to help explain this are impermanence and no self. All things are radically impermanent. All experiences, all beings are radically changing over and over and over again. And when you get that deep sense of history, we in the West get a sense of this. 13.8 billion year history, all things are in a radical stream of impermanence. Because of this, nothing exists absolutely. Everything arises in a network of processes. So there's no permanent self, no permanent me that is not linked to every other creature that we come into contact with. So interdependence takes interconnectedness to a further level. It's not just that we're interrelated, it's that the existence of anything at any moment in time is due to countless past and present connections. Now the original intent, it's a very deep teaching, so we can get into that more, but the original intent of this was to talk about, it was not about ecology or nature, it was to provide insight into why human beings fall into limitless desires and cravings, and so we constantly end up being dissatisfied. Understanding interdependence and interconnectedness was to help end all dissatisfaction in life. But some contemporary Buddhists see this vision of mutuality and relatedness as a basis for ecological healing and enlightenment. So they've reinterpreted interdependence to affirm the intrinsic goodness of all beings within the universe. So rather than escaping a dissatisfying world, interdependence becomes a healing vision of cosmic and ecological togetherness. So an example of this would be the Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and for whom all Buddhist teachings are based on interdependence. Thich Nhat Hanh says, even rather than interdependence, he would prefer the term interbeing. It's not that we're interrelated, it's that we inter-are. There's no being me apart from you and everything else in the universe. Nhat Hanh offers tangible examples to explain interdependence that not only express this basic Buddhist teaching, but that are also explicitly ecological. A flower, for example, he says, is always receiving and taking in non-flower elements: water, air, sunshine. What's the difference between flower and non-flower? What makes up flower at any moment apart from the water, the soil, and the air? Just as a flower is really, if you look deeply, in a stream of change, then so is human life, which can also not be separated from water, air, sunshine, and flowers. Perhaps his most famous example, though, of interbeing is his invitation to ponder deeply a piece of paper and to see the cloud within it. This is not, he says, just some poetic whimsy or some philosophical analogy. No, by contemplating the paper's origins, we see the fact of interdependence. The paper arises because of previous conditions which are present to it right now. He says, if you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow, and without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. So we can say that the cloud and the paper inter-are. In this reflection, Nat Hanh continues on, and he discovers within the paper the presence of the sun that made the tree grow, the logger who cut the tree, the bread that fed the logger, the parents who gave birth to the logger. Just as this paper contains a multitude of other beings, there is no way we can annihilate this piece of paper. You cannot render it into nothingness. This sheet of paper has never been born, and it will never die. It can take on other forms of being, because all things are impermanent. All things are changing, moving into something else, something new. There's always newness, but there's never nothingness. So Nat Hanh is taking what science tells us, that matter can neither be created nor destroyed, and developing a moral vision from it. By extrapolation, everything in the universe is like this piece of paper. We contain a host of other beings within us. There's no time when a separate I begins and no time when a separate I dies. Meditating on the principle of inner being, by peering deeply into reality, for Nat Hanh, can give people an experience of themselves as connected to the universe. And that experience can bring about compassion and peace and a sense of wholeness. But there's a second purpose to it, I think. As a reflection on interbeing, it's meant to eliminate fear and suffering, but it's also meant to teach us that without healthy clouds, healthy sunshine, healthy soil, there may be no papers, no flowers, and no us. Healthy clouds equals healthy paper, healthy us. Buddhist interdependence, then, even without a doctrine of the Creator, matches the cosmic common good's attempt to provide a moral vision by which human beings are part of a greater cosmic whole. And to care for the whole is to care for us as well. There's no understanding the human apart from the earth and the cosmos, and indeed to all beings. And then finally, our last tradition. Indigenous traditions are a crucial source for developing a sound ecological moral vision. Without idealizing indigenous peoples as if they were the perfect ecological exemplar, the perfect people who ever existed and so forth. We don't want to do that, but I do want to say that the history of indigenous relationships to the land or to the earth might still be our best example of sustainability or of human responsibility for the earth. Not that they haven't, at times, like all of us, overgone their boundaries. What kind of healthy human-earth relationship can we have? They are a primary dialogue partner. I look here at American Indian George Tinker, and he argues that there are deep, fundamental differences between American Indian cultures and Western cultures broadly. And the big one that he begins with is that American Indians organize the world spatially and not temporally. So by space as opposed to time. So the West tends to privilege metaphors of time, a linear direction of time. So we get progress, development, evolution, process. That becomes key narratives, key ways of understanding the world, from science to economics to theology. By contrast, American Indians think spatially, geographically, he says. So, for example, the creation stories don't talk about once upon a time, but once upon a place. It has to do with people in a definable ecosystem. Because of this, indigenous peoples view themselves as attached to particular lands. Their creation stories are devised to give them not just a history, but a place to which they belong. Tinker describes this attitude to the land as a spatial responsibility, a spatially related responsibility to the land and to all the animals, the waters, the mountains, and the birds that share that land with them. American Indians, then, are more ready, I think, to assume the interrelatedness of all living and non-living creatures and to see them as family. Whereas for Pope Francis, this leap from St. Francis to Brother, Sun, and Sister Moon might feel to many of us still like quite a leap. For them, it was more part of the warp and woof of their culture. So the members of the community, he says, include the four-leggeds, the birds, living, moving things, which would include rocks and hills and grasses and trees and rivers, and the two-leggeds. And he says two-leggeds include bears, certain birds, and humans of all colors. So you get this very different kind of grouping of creatures than we normally hear. Tinker's depiction of an American Indian moral vision yields an ethic of balance and reciprocity. So balance has a sense of harmony between the creatures. It's not that there is never a disruption, because obviously in an evolutionary world, we need to consume and use in order to survive. But what balance seeks is that when there is a disruption, there must be some kind of act done to restore the balance. There must be a keen awareness of our presence within the whole, and that when we use another part, we have to make amends for it in some way. So when going hunting or when going to war, there would be some kind of ritual act to make amends. Similarly, an ethic of reciprocity underscores the kinship between humanity and the rest of creation and connotes a kind of mutuality between them. An excellent example of this mutuality is a prayer from the Lakota, also known as the Sioux, who are primarily in South Dakota, North Dakota area. And the prayer is Matakeosin. Matakeosin translates roughly into all my relations, or we are all related, something like this. Tinker explains that like the Christian word amen, it is often used at the end of a prayer. But unlike amen, occasionally it is the only verbal prayer that's used. So when the Lakota go into the Inapi, or the sweat lodge, sometimes Mitakeosin is the only word spoken throughout this entire ritual. So it can become a prayer unto itself. Now, as you can guess, behind the word related is a much bigger category than we're accustomed to in the West. So relations would include, of course, your relatives, it would include all human beings, and it would include all creatures. Every Lakota know, he says, who prays this prayer knows that our relatives include the four-leggeds, the wingeds, and the living, moving things on earth. Tinker cites a Lakota teacher who suggests that a better translation for Matakeosin might be, for all the above me and below me and around me things, that is, for all my relations. This more recent translation perfectly expresses Tinker's idea that American Indians organize the world spatially rather than temporally. What binds these creatures to the one who prays this prayer isn't a common history or even a common root in God or the Creator. Rather, it's their location and their proximity to the speaker, their rootedness in the land. There is a communion of creatures who exist above, below, and around the one who prays. So this spatial, community-oriented prayer affirms the interrelatedness of humanity with other creatures. So the prayer Matakeosin contains in ritual form reciprocity, balance, and a communion of creation. So this exploration into other religious traditions suggests that the Catholic vision of a cosmic common good has many resonances in other religious traditions. They're going to be different. There will be differences and dissimilarities among them. But because of the similarities, there might be what philosopher John Rawls calls an overlapping consensus. There might be so many, I don't have a graph here, but so many areas of overlap that some of these basic tenets that I outlined about creaturely dignity and the cosmic common good might become a common ground for interreligious ecological ethics. It isn't the case, as I said before, that every person will adopt this as a moral vision. But there does seem to be some significant common approaches across vastly different cultures. Worldwide, more than 8 in 10 people identify with a religious group, says the Pew Religious Study Group. And the religious traditions I discussed today can be found on every continent and likely in every country in the world. Naming a common moral vision might help encourage interreligious cooperation on shared goals like protecting our common home. And I think, I'd be curious what you think, evidence of a common ethic might inspire those who don't identify with any religious tradition, like the increasing rising number of the nuns, those who say no religious affiliation. Because sometimes a moral vision can be refocused not by a group we claim allegiance to, but by someone whose ideas inspire us, by someone who can provide a sense of the world more adequate to our experience. Now, moral vision alone is not enough to protect our common home. We need concrete actions. We need massive social and cultural changes. For people of faith, I think we need prayers and spiritual practices that can teach us how to perceive the cosmic common good, or dharmic ecology, or balance with all our relations. for all human beings, for all of us, we need broad shifts towards renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, building resilient cities. Yet still, I think those actions will spring more quickly and more firmly from the soil of a robust moral vision that perceives the interconnectedness of creation and humanity's call to pursue the cosmic common good, to protect the earth and her creatures. A moral vision can lead to virtues, which can lead to actions, which can lead to a new society. But let us return finally to our astronauts and to Pope Francis. American astronaut Joseph P. Allen once said, "With all the arguments pro and con for going to the moon, no one suggested that we should do it to look at the earth. But that may, in fact, have been the most important reason of all." What is it that can refocus our vision and refocus our human role on earth? Pope Francis ends his encyclical Laudato Si with two prayers, one meant for Christians and one meant for all who espouse a belief in a creator, but I think one that could potentially be adopted by many as a wish for the cosmic common good. He says, "Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light." Thank you.
Is that better? Yes. Thank you, Dan, so much for your inspiring paper. And I'm sure that this has just inspired lots of questions and lots of comments. Is there anybody who would like to start a question or a comment? I know it's pretty profound stuff. Sorry. Yes.
I liked the picture of the networks that you had, the vein network and the leaf network. And if you were to juxtapose those networks with, for example, a transportation network or a stormwater collection system network or a water distribution system network, you'd see similar patterns. I'm just wondering if you were to do that, how would that resonate with you and the message?
So you're saying how human systems mirror nature? Or how
yeah, so you discussed interconnectedness, right, and that has a lot to do with, and again, your space is not my space, so this is fun to talk about this, and I could be coming at it from a totally different or inappropriate perspective, but this notion that we also create interconnectedness through infrastructure systems, right, and that can in fact affect natural interconnectedness. So I'm wondering if you could reflect upon differentiating between those two types of networks and whether or not there's some sort of moral message for the kind of ways that we create networks to increase consumption. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a couple thoughts. So you mentioned the transportation network, and as far as I know, many times those transportation systems were established with very little attention to the habitats that they were going through, oftentimes the poor communities that were erased in order to make highway systems possible. So I think there's a mixed history there. I think it would be better if they mirrored the kind of interconnectedness that you see with the Amazon and the blood vessel and the so forth. But let's say that we do build transportation systems that are more sensitive to neighborhoods and to habitats and things like that. You're still going to run up into can I build my neighborhood here, or should we make room for this particular species or this kind of ecosystem? And so what I'm trying to do, and I don't have any, for someone who looks at the cosmos, I don't get that regional, but I think that the human common good has to fit within the planetary, within the cosmic. And I would say that whenever you have that kind of ethical debate, you would need to look at overriding justification. So in ethics, we often talk about prima facie reasons, so things that should be done first unless you have an overriding concern to do the other. So you might say, I want to privilege this neighborhood, but in this instance, this one species of fish exists only in this one place on Earth. And so there, the overriding reason for, I would like another subdivision, simply doesn't match the kind of ethical standard that you need to override it. Is that?
There's a question over here.
Thank you for a wonderful paper and for explaining how we are all interrelated, including spiritually. You said not just physically, and we human beings can receive the contribution of the rest of the universe. Could you please explain maybe in greater detail how spiritually we can influence the universe in a good way? What can the universe gain from us?
Yes. What need does the universe have for us? Well, a couple ones. So in a Catholic perspective, clearly the Creator has made us for worship of the Creator, along with every other creature, to fulfill our greatest inclinations, to fulfill what it means to be human, just as a tree fulfills what it means to be a tree and a river fulfills what it means to be a river. That I think being human would be at least two things. One is to offer up a particular kind of awe and wonder and celebration. And not awe and wonder of celebration of what humans can do, but wonder of all that the Creator has made. And I don't want to say that that is a superior contribution to the glory of God than a tree or a river, but it's specific to us. And to observe the beauty of Proxima B and to celebrate how amazing it would be to find that kind of existence, I think is something that would be a spiritual benefit to the Earth and to the cosmos as a whole. And the second, though, is because we are the most powerful creature on Earth, and we find ourselves in the situation we're in, I think there is much we can do to preserve as much of living species as we can. That with great power comes great responsibility, and we haven't used it very well, but that at this moment in time, there is much to be done. This is not a moment to wait. This is a moment to act with as much human power and initiative as we can to preserve the planetary common good. Does that answer your question? Yes. Good.
Could I nudge you on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because you talked about sort of the world vision. You talked a lot about the world vision of the common ground that we have, and you talked about that in relationship to significant religious traditions. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned 80 to 90% of people living on the planet claim an affiliation with one of the major religions. And yet it seems that a worldview of materialism has intersected, if not overtaken, that world vision of common ground. I'm not even sure what my question is, but it relates to the sense of spirituality and how do you think we can tolerate that paradox, if not contradiction?
Yeah, so for those of you who haven't read Laudato Si yet, Pope Francis sets up a kind of, not dilemma, but of warring worldviews. And one is the gospel of creation, and the other is what he calls the technocratic paradigm, which takes scientific experimentation and observation, which has done so much good for the world, but if it becomes the only paradigm through which we encounter reality, seeing nature and everything as something to be studied and observed and controlled, then it can lead to the kind of destruction of the earth that we have now. So how do we put these two visions together? I think trying to create as much dialogue as possible would be one. Chapter 5 of Laudato Si is the biggest word that you find is and. This community and that community. We need scientists and economists. We need Christians and Jews and Buddhists and everyone to recover the deepest roots of our various traditions. But back to your question about this culture of materialism, for Pope Francis, a lot of it comes down to awe and wonder and really perceiving the depth dimension of the world around us, and that it falls below human dignity just simply to consume, that that's not our highest calling. And so I wonder if there's something about reclaiming our humanity here, to reuse something simply, to cook only as much food as can reasonably be consumed, to recycle. All these little daily acts are important for sustainability, but they're also an embodiment of what it means to be human. But I don't know. I don't know how to convince. For so long, so many people have lived without the basic material things that they need to survive. And there's a historical cause to that as well for many people around the world. People who had enough to survive and now they don't because of, I might say, the technocratic paradigm has robbed them of it. To expose that history would be one part of it, and then also to help us recover our roots.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a question or comment over here.
Thank you so much for your talk, Dan. I've often called myself a citizen of the world, and I'm just so aware of nationalism and even the recent Brexit vote kind of pulling away from nations trying to work together. But it seems to me that maybe our world religions have a role to play in bringing, helping us to rise above nationalism. One of our speakers commented about, the air doesn't just belong in Ohio, it might have been yourself, comes into Pennsylvania, what's happening in China. So the issues that we're facing about the survival of our planet seem to me to call us to rise above nationalism to this political responsibility you commented on that relate both, that need to keep in mind human dignity as well as our interconnectedness. So I'm wondering if you see any, maybe Pope Francis, but others that might be trying to help world leaders, political people to come to a place where they can do the things that are going to help us to survive. I know the Paris conference was certainly good, but from the faith dimension.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, yeah, so a couple things. So one thing is Pope Francis calls on political leaders to act with courage, to rise above the petty interests that might usually hold them back, and suggest how will future generations judge you for the actions and for the proposals you make now. And really, again, trying to call people up to their human dignity, to fully live that out. But the second point I might make actually might say, instead of going above nationalism, we need to maybe go below nationalism. So in Catholic social thought, there's this idea of subsidiarity, which has many different features of it, but in general it means that decisions should be made at the smallest and most local possible unit of decision making possible. So you don't want the federal government to come in and make a decision that perhaps a local community can make for themselves. The role of the higher or more above power is to assist or provide a benefit to the local group. And so some people are talking about bioregional subsidiarity, talking about what does this local region need more than just simply nationalism. And I think that's why a lot of cities are looking at being on the resilient cities list, because we don't see that action happening at the national and international level. So in some ways we need to think cosmically and globally and locally and then act locally and globally, and then that will also be acting cosmically. If that makes sense.
And speaking of action, my friend in the back of the room had a question earlier that he didn't get to ask, and I think it's very appropriate. If you could.
My question then just related to her own question. I was discussing with her, that was the question I wanted to ask before now, the issue of we're here talking about how to take care of, the earth and everything, the common good. And beyond the reality of this hall, there is, political debates going on here and now. I don't mean to be political. Neither am I meant to be partisan in a way, but generally. How do we translate this beyond the reality of this, hall, academic hall, to people who have decisions to make tomorrow that will affect everything here, not only in the US here, but whatever goes on here shades a kind of influence to the world there. In Africa, people look up to what goes on here. The reality, people deny, climate change. Some people, not all. So, and this is hotly debated. So my question is, how do we translate in practical terms what we gather here to people up there who have the power to influence certain things in the world tomorrow or today?
So on the first level, and I concede this as a major weakness, moral vision takes a long time. It takes a long time to seep into one individual, and it takes a long time to turn the boat around, as it were, or to recenter our focus. So in some ways, I think moral vision is central. That's one of the questions that keeps coming up. How do we get to see the earth, these rivers? How do we get to see them a little bit differently? On the other hand, in terms of the immediate action that you're talking about, last year at the climate change conference, this very conference discussing climate change, somebody said, of the 10 things you do to save the earth, one should be one that is personally important to you, and 2 through 10 should be calling your elected representatives and going to protests and trying to make your voice heard. So I think, how do we translate moral vision to our students and to our family and friends and the culture? I think it's talking about these basic values and principles, but in the immediate short term, it also means immediate political action. I don't know if that answers your question. But we might have some better answers out here in the audience, so please feel free.
See, there, and here.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I especially like the interreligious dimension, of shared values and, of our common heritage. My question is, with some of our conference who work in the Muslim world, in places like Algeria, they talk about what Pope Francis also highlighted about differentiated responsibilities. That is not all of us who contributed equally to what is happening. So what will be your response to that, and how can that help in this interreligious dialogue? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, we talked this morning quite a bit about the poor and about the different responsibilities and impacts. So that didn't come in this talk, but thank you for bringing it up. One of the phrases that Pope Francis uses is ecological debt in Laudato Si, and of course what you mentioned, differentiated responsibility. So that as much as we are one human family on one planet, the way certain nations and cultures have historically acted are very different, and the impacts of these environmental changes are going to be felt very, very differently around the world. So for example, ecological debt raises this idea that historically certain nations have burned so much fossil fuel, and yet the countries that are going to feel the worst effects of that are the ones that did not burn that fossil fuel. The global north, globally, these developed nations own a lot of financial debt to the southern countries, forcing them into economic financial decisions that are to their ill benefit. I could go on, there's more to that, but how would it fit into interreligious dialogue? That's a really interesting question. I hadn't thought of that before. I think, especially as a Western Christian, maybe dialoguing with someone in India or in Africa, that would be an important point to raise, that there is a planetary common good, and some countries have a greater contribution to ensuring other people's participation as well. So, thanks.
Hey there, Dan. That was a wonderful presentation. So I'm playing with these two phrases, and I wondered if you could play with me a little bit. So moral vision and Pope Francis's first principle of perceiving the Creator. And I'm wondering, like, a moral vision. A vision, in one way, is a metaphor, like a metaphor for a world view, a belief, you know, a kind of understanding. Right? But vision, more primarily, is a perceptual experience, like perceiving morally, perceiving our world in a moral way. And so I'm really intrigued that he spoke of perceiving the Creator. He didn't say conceiving the Creator, right? He said perceiving the Creator. And I'm just wondering about your sense of how we can help foster direct experience, direct perception that reveals a world of interdependence, a world of common good, that we spontaneously see the world this way. And so it may be a question, what's the relationship between conceptions and direct experience and ethical, loving action?
Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, that's lovely. I mean, one thing that one reason I look to interreligious dialogue and to comparative theology is to offer up different kinds of worldviews. One of the fruits of looking at other religious traditions is to find some kind of intriguing resemblance between the two, where there's something similar but also something quite different, and it raises all sorts of interesting nuances. And what I like about comparative ecological ethics is that there does seem to be so much in common with each other. But to offer up to students and to other people is, if you think Pope Francis and St. Francis is a little strange, you'll see something similar in many different Hindu traditions, you'll see it in Buddhist traditions, you'll see it in African indigenous, you'll see it in American Indian, over and over again, different ways, but similar, rerouting the human person in a broader community. So you do get the conception. But let's say for Americans, and especially for the nuns today, for those with no religious affiliation whatsoever, because otherwise it conjures up Catholic nuns, if they lack the direct experience, then this question might not even come up. A tree is something I walk by, going from the library to the restaurant, back to my dorm, and therefore there is no ethical vocation to save this thing with which I have no relationship. And so I've been thinking about that, of trying to, because I can give you texts from the Bible, I can give you texts from the Bhagavad Gita, I can give you all these texts and get you to see how they saw the world, but if you don't have a direct experience, it might not filter into anything. And so I think you need all those things going hand in hand. You would need some kind of meditative, contemplative experience, whether you name it as God or not, but you have some kind of direct experience with the living, non-human world, that otherwise the vocation doesn't have the right soil to root in.
There was a question over here.
Good question.
Thank you. First, I'd like to start off by saying I really appreciate your presentation. It was really outstanding, very nicely done. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, I had the privilege of working with former Vice President Al Gore and Carl Sagan, who had, they both had the same idea, which was that climate change would not be addressed until we made it a moral issue. And in order to do that, we need to bring the great faith together to talk about this. And so it was launched early, I believe, in 1991 at St. John the Divine Church in New York City, where the Catholic bishops, the mainline Protestant churches, a small group of evangelical churches and leaders, and there were three different leaderships of the Jewish community came together and had there were some really fantastic conversations and developments over that time. And I've seen since then a die-off of some of those groups. Particularly, I've seen a disappearance of the Catholic bishops and the leadership of the Catholic community, to be really painfully blunt about that. The evangelicals have actually, to my surprise, have actually grown in this space and have become a much more active voice. The question I have is bringing it down to the local level you talked about. How do we do that? Because I totally embrace what the Pope has said in his beautiful writings, and yet I don't see that trickling down to the church, to the local church, and I just wonder what your reflection on that might be. I think incidentally you'd be a great force in that community today to reinvigorate that conversation because it was an important one.
Thank you. Yeah, well, at least on the national level, I've been to a few meetings of the U.S. Catholic bishops and meeting with leaders from different organizations and even global bishops. So there is activity. Obviously, there are so many issues facing at least the Catholic Church with dwindling numbers of clergy. And I mean, even just here in the Diocese of Pittsburgh, there's a massive conversation going about how do we face the future as a church. And so I've talked to, there's interest among the clergy about Laudato Si, but I think this restructuring, just as an example, is taking up so much mental space that I'm not sure much else will be done. But so I do think there is interest, but it is a challenge. I mean, I think it's the same challenge that most of us find in most of the communities to which we belong. How do you make this human-Earth relationship, climate change, and all these other issues at the forefront? So I don't have an answer, but thank you for the question.
There's a question over here? I keep saying questions, but of course, comments are welcome as well.
This is more of a comment. To follow up on that, I keep encountering that there's, at least in my general area, there's relatively little acknowledgement of Laudato Si. It's almost like, well, we had it, we done it, we might have a meeting or two on it, that's it. Oh, by the way, Laudato Si is maybe the first half of paragraph 50, it's a line such and such from another paragraph, that's it. Whether it be on Catholic radio or Catholic TV, and I just I don't see a lot of action. It's almost like, well, we got other things to do. The problem is, how do we energize the Catholic community? Because I have actually had more interest from the Protestant and Jewish community than I have from some aspects of the Catholic community.
Well, let's tell them about the Integrative Creation Conference here at Duquesne University, celebrating the vision of Pope Francis and protecting our common home. I mean, the most we can do is to talk to our friends. We can pray, talk to our pastors about it, and I think also maybe initiating some or suggesting concrete changes at the parish level and in neighborhoods is a way of enacting the vision without trying to convert somebody. So talking about doing an energy audit at the parish, talking about how the church uses its land, in our schools talking about growing food, talking about what kind of flowers do we grow? Do we grow native flowers, or are they just what happens to be pretty? What kind of fertilizer do we use on these things? What is our fossil fuel usage? All these questions, these real hard questions, these practical questions, I think is a way of kind of testing out, well, Pope Francis did talk about our responsibility to care for creation. Oh, I kind of bought into it until you started asking me whether or not we can buy styrofoam cups at the party, or whether or not we really should be using glasses and forks. So maybe perhaps asking some of those concrete questions would kind of raise the level to which we actually are committed.
Jerry is.
Well, thank you, Dan, very much indeed. That's been absolutely wonderful, this session. Your book was most inspiring, but my goodness gracious, to have a presentation even more inspiring than your book, quite an achievement. We're going to have a little stretch break for about 10-15 minutes, and then we're going on to our next session at 2:30. All right, thank you all.